Hey guys, good evening. Tonight, we are about to enter a world where every night could be a battle between life and death. Imagine this, a frozen stone castle, fierce winds sweeping along the battlements, and darkness that seems to seep into your bones. The torches flicker, but the warmth barely reaches you. You trudge across the icy flagstone floors, and every breath floats like mist in the air. One wrong step, one moment of carelessness, and the cold could claim you before dawn. This is not just history, it is a story of survival. Tonight, we will discover how people endured such harsh nights when the cold itself lurked like death. You will see, this was not only a story of kings or knights. It was a story of strategy, courage, and extreme resilience. Some slept under furs, some kept animals in their beds for warmth, and some invented routines that seem almost magical today. Every blanket, every curtain, every spark of fire mattered. Before we fully step into this chilling world, I have a small request. If my little corner of history can capture even a moment of wonder for you, then please hit the subscribe button, leave a like, and comment below telling me where in the world you're watching from. It truly warms my heart to see our viewers gathered from all corners of the globe. Now, dim the lights in your room, maybe switch on a small fan if you like, and slowly sink into your bed. Close your eyes, take a deep breath, and together, let's place our feet inside the ice-cold corridors of a medieval castle, where surviving the night was a test every single time. Tonight, you will feel how people slept on the edge of death.
Frozen nights and life or death survival. Tonight, let's step into a world that's colder, darker, and far less forgiving than anything most of us could ever imagine. Picture a medieval castle, perched atop a wind-swept hill, its stone walls towering and unyielding. By day, these fortresses might seem romantic to modern eyes, picturesque monuments to a bygone era. But when night falls, the truth is harsh. The castle is not a warm sanctuary. It is a cavernous, icy labyrinth where every night is a battle against the cold, and every breath of air could steal your life if you are unprepared. Even before the sun disappears beyond the horizon, the chill begins to settle in. The massive stone walls, built to repel battering rams and hordes of enemies, do exactly that. They repel warmth, too. By the time twilight deepens into night, the temperature inside the castle could plummet close to freezing, regardless of how many roaring fireplaces might be burning. Imagine walking across a flagstone corridor, your boots scraping against surfaces polished smooth by centuries of footfalls. The air is damp, heavy, and merciless, and every step echoes like a drumbeat, reminding you of your vulnerability. In these conditions, sleep is not a luxury, it is a calculated act of survival. A person who fails to prepare properly could wake in the middle of the night shivering uncontrollably, fingers and toes stiffened by frost, and find that the very room around them feels like a tomb. Breathing becomes visible, each exhale forming clouds in front of the face, while the stone radiates an unrelenting chill that seeps through even the thickest clothing. The inhabitants of these castles were fully aware of this harsh reality. Nobles, servants, and children alike had to adopt strategies to stave off hypothermia, frostbite, and sometimes even death. There was no central heating, no insulated walls, no soft mattresses that trap warmth like modern bedding. What there was knowledge passed down through generations, rituals, routines, and clever tricks that allowed life to continue even in the face of biting winter. For a castle resident, nightfall meant shrinking the living space. Large halls that might have been used for dining or gatherings during the day were left mostly empty at night. Fires were banked strategically to heat small rooms, not entire chambers. Beds were carefully placed away from drafts and sometimes elevated to catch the slightly warmer air rising from the floor. Thick tapestries, blankets, and furs were layered wherever possible. The goal was to create microclimates, tiny islands of warmth within a stone fortress designed to resist it. Yet even with all these measures, surviving a winter night in a castle was far from easy. Imagine lying in a large chamber, fully dressed in layers of wool and linen, your feet wrapped in furs. The bed, raised high above the floor, offers some relief, but the cold rises from the stone beneath and swirls around the room. You hear the distant echo of a guard's boots on stone, a dog barking in the courtyard, the wind whistling through arrow slits, and you realize the world outside is as merciless as the world within. Each sound reminds you that this is a life balanced precariously between endurance and the threat of death. The cold was not just an inconvenience, it shaped every aspect of medieval life. It dictated when and how people slept, how they dressed, and even how they interacted. Sleep was communal because warmth was communal. People huddled together, sometimes even with animals, to share body heat. This lack of privacy, while unimaginable to modern sensibilities, was essential for survival. Shared warmth literally meant the difference between life and death. Even in noble chambers, the struggle against cold was relentless. Historical records tell of travelers who woke to find frost forming on their bed curtains or wash basins frozen solid. Frost on walls was considered a normal part of winter. A chamber free of it was a rare luxury. And yet people endured, finding ways to adapt and survive in conditions that would be fatal for anyone unprepared. Every detail mattered. The direction of a bed, the thickness of a blanket, the proximity to a fire, the presence of a sleeping companion, human or animal. Night after night, winter after winter, survival in a castle was a test of ingenuity and resilience. The cold taught people to be observers, planners, and engineers of comfort on a tiny, personal scale. Every evening was a ritual, fires stoked, curtains drawn, beds arranged meticulously, and bodies layered until mobility became secondary to warmth. The goal was singular and unyielding, to survive the night. So, as you imagine yourself lying in one of these stone chambers, wrapped in furs, the fire flickering weakly in the corner, and wind howling through the cracks in the walls, think about the stakes. This was life and death theater, played out every single night. The castle may have been a fortress, impregnable to enemies, but inside it offered no mercy from the elements. Survival was a constant challenge, and every night won or lost left its mark on the women enduring cold nights and hygiene. Now, let's step closer into the heart of the medieval castle and focus on a group whose nightly struggle against the cold was relentless, the women of the fortress. While knights, lords, and servants all faced the bite of winter, women carried additional burdens, both physical and social, in their fight to survive through nights where the cold seemed almost alive, seeping through walls, through curtains, and into the very layers of fabric that covered them. In a time long before central heating, insulated windows, or even the concept of a cozy mattress, women relied on layering garments of wool, linen, and furs to create a barrier against the merciless stone and the icy drafts sneaking through arrow slits and wooden shutters. But clothing alone was not enough. Every night, a woman had to strategically place herself in the castle chamber, near a hearth if possible, but not so close as to disturb others or risk a burn. She would often lie beside a companion, sometimes another woman, sometimes children, and even animals like cats or dogs, because shared body heat could mean the difference between waking alive or frozen to death. Hygiene in the dead of winter posed another layer of difficulty. Baths were infrequent and often a challenge in freezing water. Women had to balance cleanliness with survival, using damp cloths or quick rinses rather than plunging into icy water that could sap their strength and make them vulnerable to frostbite. Water that was even slightly warm was a luxury. It was used sparingly and often shared among family members. Public or communal bathing areas might exist, but in the midst of winter, venturing out was almost unthinkable. Moreover, women had to contend with biological realities, like menstruation, which added complexity to an already grueling nightly routine. Special care was taken to manage periods discreetly, but in a world where privacy was minimal or non-existent, women often had to do so in full view of other family members or servants. Bedding was layered not only for warmth, but also for comfort and practicality, creating a sanctuary, however modest, in the middle of icy stone halls. Even sleeping arrangements reflected this struggle. In many households, everyone slept together in the same room: men, women, children, and sometimes animals. There was no space to separate by gender or age as we understand it today. A single large bed might accommodate several people, pressed together for warmth. Women, often in the center, became living radiators of heat, their bodies shielding children and sometimes older relatives from the harsh bite of winter. Every movement was deliberate. Too much wriggling could disturb the delicate thermal balance of the bed and result in a cold night for all. Survival, however, was as much about mental fortitude as physical endurance. Nights were long, with hours stretching endlessly in darkness. The cold pressed against every inch of skin not covered by furs or blankets. Women were not only keeping themselves alive, they were caretakers, strategists, and sometimes the unofficial wardens of warmth for the family. They monitored who needed extra blankets, who should sleep closer to the fire, and how best to arrange furs for maximum comfort. Even small tasks, like adjusting a curtain to block a draft, could feel like a tactical maneuver in a nightly battle against the elements. The challenge of winter was not only external. Stone walls absorbed the heat of the day only minimally, and by evening, the castle could feel like a massive freezer. Women had to maintain patience and stamina, teaching children to tolerate the cold, whispering encouragements to frightened companions, and often enduring pain in silence. Each night was a rehearsal in resilience, a lesson in improvisation, and a test of endurance that left its mark both physically and emotionally. And yet, despite these hardships, women demonstrated extraordinary ingenuity and adaptability. They used what the castle offered: heated bricks placed near feet, furs and blankets arranged to trap warmth in microclimates, and sometimes even heated water bottles or small fires in stone containers. Rituals were repeated night after night, passed down through generations, ensuring that even in the harshest conditions, survival was possible. The communal nature of sleep also had social implications. There was no secrecy, no private sanctuary, and yet this lack of privacy became part of the survival strategy. Being close to others maximized warmth and provided comfort, both physical and psychological. For women, managing this balance between intimacy, utility, and survival required intelligence, patience, and endurance. They became the silent backbone of castle life, ensuring that the household could rest and survive another frigid night. Imagine lying in one of these chambers yourself. The stone floor radiates chill upward. You're wrapped in furs, lying close to another body. The only sound the wind whistling through cracks and the distant guard's footsteps echoing in the hall. Every breath forms clouds in front of your face, and the warmth of a shared bed is the only barrier between life and the icy grasp of night. Every movement, every shift in position, every adjustment of blankets is a careful calculation. And yet within these constraints, women found ways to endure, to comfort, and to survive. In essence, medieval women mastered the art of cold survival. Their nights were long, sometimes seemingly endless, filled with challenges that tested both body and mind. Hygiene, warmth, and the care of others were constant preoccupations, yet they endured with quiet heroism. These nights shaped their lives and gave them a resilience that modern comfort cannot replicate. So when we think about medieval castles, don't just picture knights and battles. Picture the women enduring frozen nights, their ingenuity, and their silent struggle to survive. Every layer of clothing, every blanket, every shared warmth was a testament to human endurance, a daily, nightly defiance against the unyielding cold. In those icy chambers, life was fragile, and every night was a victory of perseverance.
Women's challenges, menstruation and hygiene. In the heart of a medieval castle, winter nights were more than a test of endurance. They were a constant negotiation with the elements. For women, the struggle extended beyond cold and fatigue. Menstruation added a layer of complexity that modern audiences might find almost unimaginable, particularly when coupled with the harsh realities of hygiene and communal living in stone fortresses. Unlike today, there were no disposable pads, no heated bathrooms, no private spaces. Women had to manage their cycles discreetly, often within chambers shared with multiple family members, servants, or even animals. Privacy was minimal or non-existent, and yet the stakes were high. And oversight could mean not only personal discomfort, but potential health issues. Fabric was a woman's only defense. Linen, wool, or layers of cloth fashioned into rudimentary sanitary protection. These had to be changed frequently, washed when possible, and dried in the limited warmth of the castle, a process that was neither quick nor comfortable. Bathing was another battle against winter. Water was cold, sometimes dangerously so, and fireplaces rarely produced enough heat to warm a basin sufficiently. Women would often rely on partial washes, wiping with damp cloths or heating small amounts of water over a fire for limited bathing. This required careful coordination. Too much exposure to the cold could lead to hypothermia, frostbite, or respiratory illness. In some records, chroniclers describe women taking turns heating water in small amounts for personal hygiene, a slow but necessary ritual repeated night after night. The cold itself was merciless. Stone walls and floors radiated chill, and even beds layered with furs and blankets could not entirely shield against freezing drafts. Menstruation in these conditions was physically taxing. Cramps and discomfort became more acute when shivering from the cold, and the layers of protective cloth often added to the burden. Every movement had to be considered. Rolling over, adjusting blankets, or even getting out of bed to relieve oneself could disrupt the delicate balance of warmth shared between family members and communal sleeping arrangements. Women developed strategies to cope. Heated stones or small containers of warm water were placed near feet or under blankets. Layers of furs were arranged meticulously around the body, creating small microclimates of warmth. Clothing was layered in such a way that it could accommodate both survival needs and menstrual management. Long nights required ingenuity. Women often wore garments that could be adjusted without exposing themselves, allowing discreet attention to hygiene without risking the warmth of others in the bed. Communal sleeping arrangements added both a challenge and a form of protection. By sharing beds with children or other family members, women could conserve body heat while also keeping a watchful eye on hygiene and care needs. This tight, sometimes cramped proximity meant that women often acted as the central hub of warmth and organization, ensuring the comfort and survival of everyone in the room while managing their own biological needs under extreme stress. Health risks loomed constantly. Without proper sanitation, menstrual hygiene could lead to infections, especially when compounded by damp, cold air and limited washing facilities. Yet women persisted, guided by generational knowledge, passed down from mothers to daughters, about how to maintain cleanliness and care for their bodies in the harshest conditions. Every action, changing a cloth, adjusting a layer of furs, or washing a small area with minimal water, was a deliberate step in survival. Even small innovations mattered. In some castles, women would layer cloths in combination with small heated stones to provide warmth while managing hygiene needs. Curtains were drawn tightly, fires banked to retain heat,
and microclimates within beds carefully orchestrated. Nights were long, and each task required patience and precision. One misstep could lead to chilling discomfort for oneself or the others sharing the space. The emotional weight of menstruation under these conditions was equally significant. Discomfort, embarrassment, and social expectations combined with the relentless code to create nights that were mentally and physically draining. Women were expected to maintain composure, care for children, and remain alert to the household's survival needs, all while navigating personal challenges invisible to the outside world. Despite these hardships, women exhibited remarkable resilience. Their nights were filled with careful planning, ingenuity, and endurance. Generations of women perfected routines that balanced survival, hygiene, and social norms, transforming harsh stone chambers into spaces where life, health, and dignity could be preserved even under freezing conditions. The challenges of menstruation and hygiene were not simply biological. They were intertwined with survival, communal responsibility, and the unyielding reality of medieval life. In essence, every night was a lesson in strategy, patience, and resilience. Women became masters of improvisation, creating solutions that allowed them not only to endure the cold, but also to maintain a level of hygiene and personal dignity despite the limitations imposed by their environment. Their success was measured in survival, in the comfort of those around them, and in the quiet, unrecognized acts that kept families alive through some of the harshest winter.
Hygiene challenges in winter. Winter in a medieval castle was relentless, not just because of the piercing cold, but also because it amplified every difficulty related to personal hygiene and health. The stone walls that formed the heart of the fortress were beautiful and imposing, yet they trapped neither warmth nor comfort. For the residents, daily survival was a careful balancing act between keeping warm, conserving energy, and maintaining cleanliness in a world where even the simplest tasks carried risk. Water was scarce and often bitterly cold. Castles rarely had running water. Basins and barrels had to be filled manually from wells or nearby streams. In winter, the task itself became a struggle, fetching water from frozen wells, carrying it through draughty corridors, and attempting to use it for washing required strength and determination. A bath in the middle of winter was more than uncomfortable. It could be dangerous. Hypothermia loomed as a real threat if one spent too long exposed to icy water, especially in chambers that offered little insulation from the biting wind. People relied on small, inventive strategies to maintain some semblance of cleanliness. Women, who bore the primary responsibility for household care, used damp cloths to wipe themselves, cleaned hands and faces regularly, and improvised partial washing techniques for children and family members. Heated water was a rare treasure, often prepared over small hearths or in carefully managed braziers. Every drop had to be rationed, reused, or shared, emphasizing the ingenuity required to preserve hygiene without compromising warmth. Communal living added another layer of complexity. Entire families and sometimes servants slept in the same rooms. Animals might share the space for warmth. While this arrangement helped retain heat, it made personal hygiene more challenging. Clothing and bedding became the first line of defense against dirt and disease. Layers were worn day and night, and furs and blankets were rotated or aired when the sun shone, which was a rare occurrence in the depths of winter. Menstruation in particular heightened the difficulty. Women had to manage cycles without modern sanitary products, relying on layers of cloth that could be washed or changed with minimal water. Hygiene for women was not merely a matter of comfort, it was a matter of survival, as improper care could lead to infection in an era when medical knowledge was limited. Bathrooms, when they existed, were primitive and often located at a distance from living quarters. Chamber pots were common, but their use in freezing conditions posed risks. Water inside could freeze, floors could be slippery, and nighttime trips were dangerous. The cold meant that even basic elimination required planning, careful steps, and speed. The slightest miscalculation could expose a person to frostbite or illness. Despite the harsh conditions, medieval residents were not passive. They developed systems to maintain hygiene that worked within the constraints of their environment. Thick layers of clothing were washed and aired whenever possible.
Fur and straw bedding were periodically cleaned, scrubbed, or replaced to reduce pests and filth. Small fires were maintained not only for warmth, but also to aid in drying clothes and cloth pads for personal care. Children were especially vulnerable. Keeping them clean and warm required vigilance and creativity. Mothers or caretakers often had to wash children with minimal water, ensure clothing layers were dry, and protect them from drafts. Shared warmth and communal sleeping arrangements helped, but it also required careful rotation and management to prevent discomfort or disease. The physical toll of hygiene practices in winter was compounded by the mental and social pressure. Cleanliness was associated with health and social expectation, yet the cold and limited resources made it almost impossible to achieve the standards known today. People had to navigate careful compromises, conserving warmth while maintaining enough cleanliness to prevent sickness. It was a delicate balance, and success was measured in small victories. Dry clothes, a child's clean hands, or the absence of illness after a harsh night. Even in noble households, the same principles applied, though with slightly more resources. Large stone halls, grand tapestries, and a few heated rooms could not completely mitigate the cold. Water had to be warmed, often only in small batches. Staff were enlisted to help maintain hygiene, distribute warm water, and ensure clothing and bedding were as clean as conditions allowed. The struggle against winter dirt and cold was universal, transcending rank or status. Ultimately, winter hygiene in a medieval castle was a study in adaptation and ingenuity. It required constant planning, resourcefulness, and awareness of the interplay between cold, water, and human needs. Every action, from heating water to changing a child's clothes, was a small strategy in the larger battle to survive the season. Maintaining hygiene was never a simple task. It was intertwined with survival, comfort, and the health of everyone in the household. Through these challenges, medieval people demonstrated remarkable resilience and creativity. They endured freezing nights, limited water, and harsh conditions, and yet found ways to preserve cleanliness, dignity, and health. The strategies developed were not only practical, they were necessary, forming an invisible network of knowledge passed from one generation to the next, ensuring that life in a castle, though cold and difficult, could continue.
Sleeping together, survival in communal spaces. In the vast, echoing halls of a medieval castle, survival during the dead of winter often depended not on the swords or armor that filled its armories, but on the bodies that shared its cold stone rooms. Unlike modern notions of private bedrooms and insulated walls, medieval life demanded a communal approach to sleeping. Entire families, servants, and sometimes even animals huddled together for warmth, transforming social spaces into pockets of survival against a merciless chill. The reason was simple. The cold was lethal. Stone walls, while perfect for defense against invaders, absorbed warmth poorly. Fireplaces, however numerous, could heat only a small area. Beyond the immediate circle of a hearth, temperatures plummeted. For survival, people had to create microclimates, tiny islands of warmth in a cavernous, frost-bitten environment. The most reliable source of heat was the human body itself. Communal sleeping was a calculated necessity. Families would often share a single large bed or sleep in clusters on straw-stuffed mattresses spread across the floor. Men, women, children, and sometimes even animals were all pressed together, maximizing the retention of body heat. Even nobles, with their grand halls and elaborate bedding, followed the same principle. Warmth was a shared commodity, not a personal luxury. The arrangement of sleepers was strategic. Women, often in the center, became living radiators for infants and children, carefully positioned to shield them from drafts. Adult men might sleep around the perimeter to act as buffers against the cold or potential intruders. Each shift, each movement was carefully considered. Even a small adjustment could disrupt the delicate balance of heat distribution. Survival in these conditions was a nightly negotiation with the physics of warmth itself. Animals played a crucial role in this communal system. Dogs, cats, and sometimes livestock were brought close to beds. Their presence provided additional heat, and in some households, the rhythmic warmth of sleeping animals became as critical as furs and blankets. The line between family members and animals blurred, all contributing to the essential strategy of warmth sharing. The social reality of communal sleeping was equally striking. There was little to no privacy. Gender, age, and rank mattered less than the immediate need for survival. While modern sensibilities might recoil at the thought of crowded sleeping quarters, in medieval castles, shared sleep was a vital and rational adaptation to environmental extremity. The closeness not only conserved warmth, but also created a sense of vigilance. Shared bodies meant shared care, ensuring that vulnerable individuals were not left exposed. Hygiene and comfort were secondary to survival. Layers of clothing were kept on through the night, and furs were strategically arranged to cover exposed skin. Even simple movements like rolling over or reaching for warmth were executed carefully to avoid disturbing the thermal balance of the group. Nights were long and still. The cold pressed from every angle, and the only defense against it was the collective warmth of human bodies. This communal system also carried emotional and psychological significance. Being close to others provided not just physical warmth, but reassurance and comfort. The darkness of stone corridors, the moaning of the wind through battlements, and the oppressive chill could be terrifying alone. Shared sleep fostered solidarity, ensuring that even in the harshest winter, no one faced the night entirely alone. Historical accounts hint at the logistics behind these arrangements. Families would rotate sleeping positions, sometimes sharing a single mattress with multiple people, ensuring that the most vulnerable, infants, elderly, or ill, remained closest to the warmest bodies. Beds were often raised from the floor to capture slightly warmer air, and heavy curtains or tapestries were drawn around sleeping clusters to trap heat further. Every detail, from bed placement to the layering of furs, reflected a highly adaptive survival strategy. Communal sleeping also influenced daily life. Because warmth was finite, people coordinated bedtime routines, adjusting clothing, bedding, and sleeping positions in anticipation of the coldest hours. Even in the largest noble castles, where fires burned in multiple rooms, the cold forced families to remain close, interact continuously, and maintain vigilance over each other's well-being. The castle's design, while formidable in defense, dictated a social rhythm centered on survival, collaboration, and shared warmth. The lessons of communal sleeping are clear. Medieval people understood that survival was not an individual pursuit, but a collective endeavor. Their nights were not simply about rest. They were carefully choreographed operations in endurance. Every layer of clothing, every strategic placement in a bed, every shared warmth from a child, companion, or animal contributed to life itself. In these icy chambers, communal sleep was more than custom. It was a lifeline, the difference between surviving winter nights or succumbing to the relentless cold. By observing these strategies, modern viewers gain a vivid sense of human resilience and ingenuity. The architecture of stone, the cruelty of winter, and the lack of modern amenities created an environment that demanded adaptation. Communal sleeping transformed cold, inhospitable spaces into habitable zones, demonstrating that in the medieval castle, warmth was not a luxury, it was a shared necessity, and survival depended on the clever, careful orchestration of bodies, clothing, and simple heat source.
Health risks, frostbite, and illness. Winter in a medieval castle was not merely uncomfortable, it was dangerous. The stone walls, while formidable against invaders, offered no protection against the harsh elements, and the cold was a constant and deadly adversary. Frostbite and illness were ever-present threats, turning nightly survival into a tense, calculated struggle. Even the nobility, insulated with tapestries, furs, and thick layers of clothing, could not escape the bite of winter. In unheated chambers, exposed skin quickly succumbed to frostbite. Fingers and toes, the extremities farthest from the core body heat, were the first to suffer. Historians have recorded accounts of individuals waking with numb, purple-tinged fingers, stiff toes, or even partially frozen limbs, forced to endure severe pain while continuing the daily routines required for survival. For common folk, the stakes were even higher. Peasants and servants often slept in communal areas with minimal bedding and few layers of clothing. Frostbite could set in unnoticed, especially during long nights when fires burned low or went out entirely. The consequences were severe: tissue damage, gangrene, or in extreme cases, death. Every movement was measured, every layer of clothing carefully maintained, because a single lapse could result in irreversible injury. Illness was another omnipresent threat. Cold, damp air in stone halls encouraged respiratory problems. Coughs, colds, pneumonia, and other infections were frequent. Hygiene challenges, limited bathing, frozen water, and communal living exacerbated these conditions, turning simple illnesses into life-threatening complications. Children, the elderly, and those already weakened by poor diet or hard labor were particularly vulnerable. A mild chill could quickly escalate into serious illness when combined with exposure, poor nutrition, or exhaustion. Medical knowledge in the medieval period was rudimentary at best. Remedies for frostbite were limited and often symbolic rather than practical. Heating stones or rubbing affected areas were common methods, but they were only partially effective, and care was inconsistent. Illnesses were often treated with herbal concoctions, prayers, or superstition rather than modern medical practices. Survival depended largely on preventative measures and adaptation rather than treatment. Families developed strategies to minimize these risks. Layered clothing, shared warmth through communal sleeping, and carefully banked fires were essential. Heated stones tucked into bedding, tightly drawn curtains, and strategic placement near hearths created microclimates that reduced exposure. Even small gestures, covering hands with extra cloth, keeping feet tucked under furs, or rotating sleeping positions could mean the difference between frostbite and relative safety. Cold exposure was not just physical, but psychological. The constant awareness of danger, the need for vigilance during night-long hours, and the knowledge that even small mistakes could have severe consequences weighed heavily on inhabitants. Fear of frostbite and illness shaped behavior. People moved less during the night, remained huddled together for warmth, and monitored each other carefully. Survival was a communal, cooperative effort. Food and nutrition played a role in resilience. Those weakened by poor diet were more susceptible to cold-related illness. The scarcity of winter provisions in remote castles amplified this risk. Families rationed food, sometimes at the expense of caloric intake necessary to generate body heat, demonstrating the delicate balance between sustenance and survival. Even simple daily tasks, such as moving from one chamber to another or fetching water, carried risks. Exposed hands and faces, wet clothing, or prolonged exposure to icy corridors could trigger frostbite or illness. Castle inhabitants adapted by minimizing movement at night, planning routes carefully, and coordinating household activities around warmth. Every step was a strategy. Children were particularly at risk. Their smaller bodies lost heat faster, making them more vulnerable to frostbite and illness. Mothers and caregivers developed nightly routines to monitor, wrap, and protect them, using every available layer of clothing and bedding. Close proximity to adults, shared body heat, and heated objects became essential tools for ensuring survival.
Communal sleeping and lack of privacy. In the frozen stone halls of a medieval castle, the concept of privacy was virtually non-existent. Families, servants, and sometimes animals all shared the same chamber, huddled together for warmth. Unlike modern homes, where bedrooms provide separation and personal space, survival in a medieval fortress demanded closeness, cooperation, and a shared vulnerability to the cold. Sleeping arrangements were dictated entirely by necessity. The cold stone floors, draughty corridors, and insufficient fireplaces meant that warmth could not be hoarded by a single person. Families clustered together on straw-stuffed mattresses, furs, and thick blankets, creating small islands of heat. Adults, children, and even animals were strategically placed to maximize shared warmth. Those closest to the center, often women, acted as radiators, preserving the body heat of those most vulnerable: infants, the elderly, or the sick. This communal sleeping, while essential for survival, meant that privacy was sacrificed. Personal space was minimal. Movements had to be deliberate. Rolling over or adjusting blankets could disturb others' warmth. Clothing was often worn throughout the night to preserve heat, leaving no room for personal comfort as understood today. Every action in these chambers carried consequences, both for one's own survival and for the collective well-being of the household. Menstrual hygiene, basic personal care, and bodily needs all occurred in view of others. There was no opportunity to retreat behind walls or closed doors. Women had to manage their cycles discreetly, changing cloth pads or adjusting clothing within the crowded room, while simultaneously maintaining warmth for themselves and others. Children, oblivious to decorum by modern standards, shared the same spaces, increasing both the challenge and the necessity of cooperation. The social hierarchy also played a role, though survival often overrode status. Nobles, servants, and children slept in proximity, prioritizing warmth over social distinction. While higher-ranking individuals might have slightly better bedding or thicker blankets, the harsh winter nights leveled social divisions in favor of practical survival strategies. Everyone's comfort was interdependent. The lack of privacy had psychological impacts. Adults had to remain vigilant, monitoring the movements and comfort of family members and servants alike. The closeness, however, also fostered trust and cooperation. In an environment where a cold night could be fatal, communal sleeping became a tool for both physical survival and social cohesion. It forced families to negotiate, compromise, and maintain awareness of each other's needs. Animals were integrated into this system. Dogs, cats, and sometimes small livestock shared beds or clustered near sleepers, adding warmth and acting as early warning systems against drafts or intruders. The presence of animals increased comfort and survival odds, but further reduced personal space, reinforcing the communal nature of life in the castle. Despite the sacrifices, communal sleeping offered benefits beyond warmth. It allowed for continuous care. Children could be tended, the sick monitored, and adjustments to clothing or blankets made in real time. Fires and heated stones were positioned strategically, and the arrangement of people and objects in the room was deliberately optimized to retain heat. Each night became a carefully choreographed routine where cooperation and vigilance were as vital as courage and endurance. The architecture of castles also reinforced this communal dynamic. Large halls and high ceilings trapped cold air, making concentrated warmth impossible unless bodies clustered together. Bedrooms, even for nobility, were rarely insulated. The only defense against frost and drafts was proximity. Shared warmth, shared blankets, and shared responsibility for survival. Ultimately, Communal sleeping in medieval castles was not a matter of choice, but a strategy for life itself. Privacy was sacrificed because it could not be afforded. Every inch of warmth counted. The arrangement demanded patience, coordination, and adaptability. It shaped relationships, household dynamics, and survival strategies. In these icy chambers, closeness was safety, cooperation was essential, and privacy was a luxury the cold could not allow.
Women enduring cold nights. In the dead of winter, the castle became a landscape of ice and shadow. Stone walls, magnificent by day, radiated a chill that seeped into every crevice. For women, enduring the long, frigid nights was a daily battle, a test not only of physical resilience, but of ingenuity and mental fortitude. While knights and men might have been armored against enemies, women faced a relentless adversary far less forgiving, the cold itself. Clothing was their first line of defense. Layer upon layer of wool, linen, and furs was carefully worn, with each garment serving a purpose. The innermost layers trapped warmth against the body, while the outer layers shielded from the icy drafts slipping through shutters and gaps in the walls. Women had to move carefully, adjusting furs and garments to maintain heat without disturbing the delicate balance of shared warmth in communal sleeping arrangements. Every misstep, a loose cloak, a gap in a blanket, could result in painful numbness or frostbite by morning. Nighttime routines were meticulously orchestrated. Women positioned themselves strategically in the bed or on the straw-stuffed mattress, often at the center to radiate warmth to children and companions. Heated stones or small water containers warmed the blankets, while curtains and tapestries were drawn tight to create microclimates within the otherwise freezing room. Survival required calculation, discipline, and an intimate understanding of the way warmth moved through bodies and fabrics. Hygiene presented its own challenges. With freezing water and limited washing facilities, women could not bathe frequently. Instead, they relied on damp cloths, careful laundering of undergarments, and occasional use of warmed water over a small hearth. Menstruation added further complexity. Cloth pads had to be changed discreetly in crowded rooms, often under layers of blankets to preserve both warmth and modesty. Despite these difficulties, women adapted strategies passed down through generations, combining practicality and ingenuity to endure even the harshest winter nights. Mental endurance was as crucial as physical survival. Nights were long and the cold seemed endless. The sound of wind whistling through battlements, the distant echo of guards' footsteps, and the groaning of stone under frost served as constant reminders of the environment's hostility. Women had to remain vigilant, not only for themselves, but for their children, elderly relatives, and sometimes servants. Every movement, every adjustment of clothing or bedding was a calculated effort to protect life in an environment that offered little comfort. Even small actions carried importance. Women would reposition furs, wrap children tightly, or adjust heated stones to optimize warmth. They shared knowledge silently across generations, which fabrics retained heat best, how to trap drafts using tapestries, and how to layer bedding for maximum efficiency. Each night was a lesson in human adaptation, a choreography of survival that required intelligence, patience, and resilience. The communal nature of sleeping also meant that women's endurance had a protective effect. By radiating warmth toward children and weaker household members, women ensured that others could survive, even if it meant enduring more discomfort themselves. Their role extended beyond personal survival. It was a central part of the household's strategy for life in winter. Despite the hardships, women found ways to adapt. They embraced routines, employed practical solutions, and endured with remarkable strength. The nights were long, the cold unrelenting, and yet their perseverance ensured that life continued. Each dawn was a quiet triumph. A night survived, children kept warm, illness averted, and frost held at bay. In the frozen heart of the castle, women were the silent guardians of warmth and survival. Their endurance shaped the household, ensured continuity through harsh winters, and demonstrated an extraordinary blend of physical resilience, ingenuity, and mental toughness. Every night they endured, every strategy they employed was a testament to the human capacity to survive against seemingly insurmountable.
Children and infants in the cold. In the icy stone chambers of a medieval castle, children and infants faced a harsh reality that modern comfort makes nearly unimaginable. The cold was relentless, seeping through walls, floors, and even the thickest bedding. For the youngest members of the household, every night was a test of resilience, both physical and emotional, for them and for the adults responsible for their survival. Babies, unable to generate sufficient body heat, were particularly vulnerable. Their tiny hands and feet quickly became numb, and prolonged exposure could lead to frostbite or even death. Mothers and caregivers employed every possible strategy to protect them, layering garments of linen and wool, wrapping infants in furs, and keeping them close to warm bodies. In some cases, infants were positioned between adults or siblings to maximize shared warmth, essentially becoming living thermal hubs in the crowded bed. Children's clothing was equally vital. Simple layers of wool and linen served as insulation, while blankets and furs were rotated throughout the night to maintain warmth. Adults vigilantly adjusted these coverings, ensuring that drafts from shutters or doors did not reach exposed skin. Even small lapses, a blanket slipping off, a child rolling over, could result in dangerously cold exposure. Nights required constant attention and care, turning what might seem like a simple sleeping arrangement into a careful strategy for life itself. Communal sleeping arrangements were essential. Families, servants, and even animals shared spaces not for comfort or convenience, but as a survival tactic. Children were often placed in the center of these clusters, shielded by adults who sacrificed their own warmth to ensure the young remained protected. Pets, too, played a role. Dogs and cats curled near children, adding body heat and providing a sense of security. These arrangements were carefully organized, almost ritualistic, reflecting a sophisticated understanding of thermal dynamics and human needs. Illness was a constant threat. The cold, combined with damp stone walls and poor hygiene, made children susceptible to respiratory infections and other winter ailments. Parents and caregivers had to act preemptively, layering clothing, adjusting blankets, and monitoring children throughout the night. Heated stones or small containers of warm water were sometimes placed near the child's bedding to provide localized warmth, a small but critical innovation in the battle against freezing temperatures. Despite these challenges, medieval caregivers demonstrated remarkable ingenuity. They developed rituals and routines that balanced warmth, hygiene, and comfort. Rotating children between adults for shared warmth, using furs and straw strategically, and coordinating bedtime positions all reflected a deep understanding of how to endure harsh conditions. These practices were passed down through generations, creating a repository of knowledge essential for the household's survival. Psychological resilience was as important as physical protection. Children were often reassured by the closeness of their caregivers, the rhythmic breathing of adults, and the steady presence of other family members. The warmth was not only physical, but emotional, a shield against the fear that might accompany long, cold nights in dark stone halls. Every gesture, from tucking a blanket around tiny shoulders to adjusting the position of a small foot, carried both warmth and reassurance, nurturing survival on multiple levels. Even in noble households, the challenges persisted. Luxurious tapestries, heated chambers, and grand beds offered some relief, but the fundamental vulnerability of children remained. Parents had to remain vigilant, balancing comfort with the limitations of the environment, ensuring that no child suffered from exposure, frostbite, or illness. The stakes were high. One cold night could have lasting consequences for a fragile body. Through these careful strategies, medieval children and infants survived winters that would seem brutal by modern standards. The combination of communal warmth, layered clothing, vigilant care, and ingenious use of limited resources created a delicate balance. Every dawn was a victory. A child kept warm, protected from frost, and alive to face another day in a world where survival was never guaranteed. In essence, children were both the most vulnerable and the most carefully protected members of the household. Their survival demanded constant attention, strategic thinking, and creative solutions. Medieval caregivers transformed the cold, unforgiving environment of stone castles into spaces where even the youngest could endure the winter, highlighting human resilience, ingenuity, and the profound lengths to which adults went to protect their children.
Men's challenges: enduring cold and night vigilance. In the shadowed corridors of a medieval castle, winter nights were a battlefield of endurance, and for men, survival demanded more than just warmth. It required vigilance. Unlike the young or infirm who relied heavily on proximity to shared body heat, men often carried the additional responsibility of guarding, maintaining security, and ensuring the household's survival while battling the relentless cold. Stone halls, though magnificent, were cold, damp, and unyielding. Fireplaces provided pockets of warmth, but the further one moved from them, the sharper the chill. Men often found themselves stationed in drafty corridors, watchtowers, or the outer reaches of sleeping chambers. Armor and heavy clothing provided some insulation, but the weight and stiffness restricted mobility and added fatigue, turning even basic movements into energy-draining tasks. Nighttime duties were intertwined with survival. Guards had to patrol icy battlements, listen for signs of intruders, and remain alert to unexpected threats, all while enduring freezing winds and exposure. Even brief moments outside the hearth could lead to frostbite in fingers and toes, numbness in limbs, or chills that lingered for hours. Returning to communal sleeping areas offered some relief, but warmth was shared and carefully rationed, leaving little room for personal comfort. Inside the castle, men had to adapt to the same strategies employed by women and children. Layered clothing, furs, and strategic positioning within the bed or communal sleeping clusters. Yet their responsibilities often required them to rotate positions frequently, alternating between providing warmth for others and stepping away to fulfill household or defensive duties. Every movement was calculated, a delicate balance between personal survival and duty. The psychological burden was intense. Vigilance demanded alertness, even during the longest, coldest nights. Men had to remain conscious of their own comfort and the safety of their family and household members. This mental strain compounded physical exhaustion. Sleep was shallow, interrupted, and perpetually influenced by drafts, cold, and the responsibilities of guarding. Hygiene posed additional challenges. Men often remained in layered clothing throughout the night, unable to perform personal care without sacrificing warmth. Bathing, laundering, or attending to basic bodily needs required careful planning and coordination, often in freezing water or drafty spaces. Illness was a constant threat. Exposure could exacerbate fatigue, weaken immunity, and increase vulnerability to respiratory conditions prevalent in the cold, damp castle environment. Communal sleeping provided partial relief. Men strategically positioned themselves to shield children, the elderly, and women from the coldest drafts. Their body heat, coupled with furs and layered bedding, created microclimates essential for household survival. Yet this role came at a personal cost: discomfort, restricted movement, and the mental vigilance of remaining attuned to the needs of others throughout the night. Despite the hardships, men developed practical survival strategies. Heated stones placed near feet or bedding, rotating positions within clusters, and careful use of blankets and furs allowed them to endure long nights.
These routines were refined over generations, forming an intricate knowledge system of how to survive and maintain functionality even in extreme cold. Nightly endurance was a test of strength, resilience, and ingenuity. Men who succeeded not only protected themselves, but also safeguarded the household. Their vigilance ensured that communal warmth was maintained, threats were monitored, and survival was shared. In a world where frostbite and illness could strike quickly, men's challenges were both physical and strategic, demanding skillful balance between self-preservation and duty. Through these harsh experiences, medieval men exemplified human adaptability and the interdependence of survival. Their nights were a dance of endurance, strategy, and care, each action measured against the threat of cold, exhaustion, and vulnerability. They became living anchors of warmth, guardians of safety, and silent heroes in a landscape where survival was never guaranteed.
Strategies for warmth, fires, furs, and microclimates. In the frozen heart of a medieval castle, warmth was a treasure more precious than gold. The stone walls, though imposing, offered no comfort against the biting winter chill. Survival required ingenuity, adaptation, and careful orchestration of every available heat source. Medieval inhabitants became masters of creating microclimates, small, intensely warm pockets in a vast, cold fortress. And their strategies were both practical and astonishingly resourceful. Fires were the first and most visible tool. Large hearths roared in great halls, casting light and heat over only a limited radius. The further one moved from the flames, the colder it became. People learned to position themselves strategically near these fire sources, often rotating throughout the night to maximize exposure. Hearths were carefully maintained. Wood was banked to smolder, producing long-lasting warmth, and smaller braziers or portable fires were used to heat personal spaces. Even a single ember could make the difference between comfort and hypothermia. Furs and textiles were equally critical. Every household possessed thick furs, woolen blankets, and layered garments. Beds were meticulously prepared, with straw mattresses layered with furs to trap heat. Curtains were hung around beds or across doorways to prevent drafts, creating enclosed zones of warmth. Women and men alike became adept at layering clothing not only for insulation, but also to allow flexibility in response to fluctuating temperatures. Layers could be added, removed, or rearranged, optimizing body heat without sacrificing mobility or comfort entirely. Microclimates were carefully engineered. Communal sleeping arrangements were organized to concentrate warmth where it was most needed. Adults were positioned near children or the elderly, radiating heat into the surrounding layers of blankets and furs. Heated stones or small containers of warm water were strategically placed beneath bedding or tucked near feet. Even subtle movements, turning in bed, repositioning blankets, or adjusting a child's clothing were part of a deliberate choreography designed to maintain optimal warmth. The architecture of castles, while hostile to comfort, was leveraged where possible. Tapestries hung on walls not for decoration alone, but to reduce drafts and insulate cold stone. Heavy curtains, door coverings, and even temporary partitions were used to create smaller, warmer chambers within vast halls. People understood that controlling airflow could dramatically affect perceived temperature. A tightly enclosed space could feel significantly warmer than an open hall, even without additional heat sources. Nighttime routines incorporated these strategies systematically. Clothing layers were adjusted, blankets positioned, and heated objects carefully moved to ensure that everyone retained body heat. Furs were rotated and aired when possible, preventing dampness from reducing their insulating properties. These were not casual actions. They were deliberate, generationally learned techniques that turned inhospitable rooms into habitable spaces. Even small innovations mattered.
Simple additions like placing a straw-filled mattress atop a raised bed reduced contact with the cold stone floor. Beds were often positioned away from windows and doors, further minimizing exposure to drafts. Heated stones were passed along between sleepers, creating moving zones of warmth that could be shared efficiently in communal sleeping arrangements. Every strategy, no matter how minor, was part of a coordinated battle against the cold. Animals contributed as well. Pets, particularly dogs, were placed near the beds of children or vulnerable individuals, supplementing warmth and acting as living heaters. Their presence enhanced survival odds and added to the carefully engineered microclimates that allowed entire households to endure freezing nights. The combination of fires, furs, textiles, microclimates, and architectural adaptations illustrates a remarkable human ingenuity in extreme conditions. Survival was not left to chance. It was engineered through knowledge, observation, and constant adaptation. Each element, flame, fur, stone, and human body, was carefully orchestrated to preserve life in a place where winter could otherwise be merciless. By mastering these strategies, medieval inhabitants not only endured the cold, but also retained a sense of order and comfort within chaos. The lessons of these techniques reveal a deep understanding of thermal management, communal cooperation, and the relentless human drive to survive against seemingly insurmountable odds. Warmth became a skill, a ritual, and a lifeline, a testament to the ingenuity and resilience of medieval house.
Illness prevention and care during winter. In the frozen expanse of a medieval castle, surviving winter was not just a matter of enduring the cold. It was a battle against disease and illness that thrived in damp, unheated stone halls. Frostbite, pneumonia, colds, and other infections were ever-present threats, exacerbated by communal living, limited hygiene, and the scarcity of medical knowledge. Preventing illness required ingenuity, diligence, and constant vigilance. Water scarcity and freezing conditions made washing a complicated task. Basins had to be filled from wells or streams often hours away, and water quickly grew icy once inside the castle. Bathing, laundry, and basic hygiene were performed sparingly, yet residents understood that even minimal care was critical to prevent sickness. Damp clothing and unwashed bodies became breeding grounds for illness, so households developed routine rituals to maximize hygiene while minimizing exposure to cold. Heat management played a central role in illness prevention. Fires were carefully banked to maintain warmth during the night. Heated stones tucked beneath bedding or inside blankets created localized warmth, reducing exposure to the cold that could weaken the body and make it more susceptible to respiratory infections. Adults would rotate sleeping positions to ensure that the most vulnerable, children, infants, or the elderly, remained protected from drafts and icy floors. Communal care was essential. Illness could spread rapidly in the tightly packed chambers of a castle. Families monitored each other closely, recognizing early signs of fever, shivering, or fatigue. Simple remedies were employed: warm broths, herbal infusions, and heated compresses. These treatments were rarely curative by modern standards, but they offered comfort, warmth, and a chance to recover, mitigating the worst effects of winter ailments. Children required particular attention. Their smaller bodies lost heat quickly, making them prone to colds and frostbite. Parents and caregivers vigilantly adjusted bedding, layered clothing, and monitored body temperature through the long nights. Heated stones or blankets were placed near infants, and children were often positioned between adults in communal sleeping arrangements to maximize warmth. These strategies reflected both practical survival tactics and tender parental care. Nutrition was another crucial factor in preventing illness. Scarce winter provisions demanded careful rationing, but households prioritized high-calorie, warming foods to support body heat and immune resilience. Porridges, stews, and preserved meats were staples, consumed strategically to maintain strength during the longest, coldest nights. Weakness from hunger or insufficient nutrition could make even minor exposure deadly, highlighting the interdependence of diet, warmth, and disease prevention. Hygiene practices, though limited by the environment, were nevertheless critical. Communal living meant that everyone had to cooperate to reduce contamination. Clothes were aired when the sun permitted, bedding rotated and shaken to remove pests, and hands and faces wiped regularly with cloths. Small gestures, like rubbing warm cloths on the face, adjusting layers, or repositioning blankets, were deliberate actions that reduced the risk of illness. Medieval knowledge of disease was rudimentary, but people were perceptive observers. They recognized that cold, damp air, combined with poor sleep and overexertion, could weaken the body. Fires were maintained not just for warmth, but to reduce humidity and prevent mold. Ventilation was controlled carefully to minimize drafts without suffocating a room. Every decision, from how blankets were layered to where a child slept, had implications for health and survival. Even nobles with access to more resources faced similar challenges. Expansive halls, multiple fireplaces, and larger beds did not guarantee immunity from illness. Staff were enlisted to monitor heating, distribute warm liquids, and ensure that everyone remained as healthy as possible. The interdependence of family members and household staff was crucial. Survival was a collective effort, blending warmth, nutrition, hygiene, and vigilance. Ultimately, illness prevention in winter was a complex choreography of care, observation, and adaptation. Every action, how fires were tended, where a child was placed, how clothing was layered, was a strategy to maintain health in an unforgiving environment. Medieval residents understood that survival depended not only on enduring the cold, but on preventing the cascading effects of exposure, malnutrition, and disease. By carefully balancing warmth, hygiene, nutrition, and vigilance, medieval households created a fragile but effective system of health preservation. These routines and strategies demonstrate not only resilience and ingenuity, but also the profound human capacity to protect life against environmental adversity. In the cold, dark winters of stone castles, survival was not left to chance. It was orchestrated with meticulous care and unwavering attention.
Food, warm drinks, and night preparation. As darkness settled over the cold stone halls of a medieval castle, survival depended on careful preparation. Winter nights were long, and every ounce of warmth and energy mattered. Before the household retired for the night, a sequence of rituals involving food, drink, and strategic preparations unfolded, practices that were crucial for enduring the bitter chill. Food was both fuel and comfort. Meals were designed to sustain body heat and provide long-lasting energy. Stews, thick with meat, root vegetables, and grains were common. Their high-calorie content helped the body generate warmth through digestion. Bread, cheese, and preserved foods supplemented these dishes, ensuring that even the longest nights would not find household members weakened by hunger. The timing of meals was strategic. The last substantial meal of the day was consumed just before bedtime, allowing warmth from digestion to help stave off the cold through the early hours. Warm drinks played a vital role. Small pots of herbal infusions, diluted wines, or broths were shared among the family. These beverages were not merely pleasurable. They provided immediate warmth, helped maintain circulation, and sometimes included spices with mild medicinal properties. Sipping slowly, household members could feel the warmth spread from stomach to extremities, an important buffer against the frigid environment. Heated water or milk was occasionally added to blankets or bedding,
creating small, localized zones of comfort, a practice that transformed a freezing stone bed into a temporary haven of heat. Night preparation extended beyond food and drink. Bedding was layered meticulously. Straw mattresses, thick blankets, and furs were arranged to maximize insulation. Curtains or tapestries were drawn across doorways and around beds to block drafts. Heated stones, placed carefully beneath blankets or at the foot of beds, provided supplemental warmth. Clothing was layered, often worn through the night, and adults coordinated positions in communal sleeping arrangements to shield children and the elderly from cold air. The rituals surrounding night preparation were both practical and symbolic. Families followed learned routines, passed down through generations, ensuring that nothing was left to chance. Every placement of a blanket, every adjustment of a heated stone, and every shared sip of warm broth reflected a deep understanding of the environment's dangers and the strategies needed to survive. In these rituals, warmth was not merely comfort, it was life itself. Even small details mattered. Doors were checked for drafts, shutters secured, and gaps in flooring temporarily blocked. Pets were gathered close to sleeping areas to add their body heat. The placement of each person, from children in the center to adults at the periphery, was deliberate. These careful preparations ensured that the limited heat available from fire, clothing, and bodies was used as efficiently as possible, creating a network of survival throughout the household. Food, drink, and night preparation also fostered psychological resilience. Sharing a hot meal, sipping warm liquids, and engaging in familiar bedtime routines provided reassurance in a world defined by cold and danger. The sensory comforts, the smell of hot stew, the tactile security of layered furs, the gentle heat from a stone helped anchor the household in safety and normalcy, even as the wind howled outside. Medieval inhabitants understood that survival was not a passive process. Each evening required planning, coordination, and action. The simple acts of eating, drinking, and arranging bedding were elevated to deliberate strategies of endurance. The combination of nourishment, warmth, and preparation created a fragile yet dependable buffer against the lethal cold, turning otherwise inhospitable stone chambers into a place where life could persist through the harshest nights. In the cold stillness of the castle, these nightly rituals were the difference between mere existence and death. They exemplified the ingenuity, care, and resilience required to survive winter, revealing how human beings could adapt to extreme conditions long before modern heating or insulation existed. Every meal, every sip, and every adjustment of blankets reflected an intimate knowledge of the environment and the extraordinary lengths medieval people went to preserve warmth, health, and life itself.
The first light of dawn crept over the horizon, casting pale, muted rays through narrow arrow slits and frosted windows of the medieval castle. The stone walls, which had loomed like icy sentinels throughout the night, now seemed to soften under the gentle illumination. For those who had survived the relentless cold of the previous hours, this was not merely a beginning, it was a triumph. Each breath drawn in the early morning carried the quiet satisfaction of having endured the night, of having outlasted the frost, and of having preserved life through ingenuity, cooperation, and sheer human resilience. Night in a castle was a test unlike any other. The hours had stretched endlessly, with stone floors and walls radiating chill, and every breath forming clouds that lingered in the damp, cold air. Darkness amplified fear. The groan of the battlements under frost, the distant echo of a dog barking in the courtyard, the faint scrape of guards' boots against frozen stone corridors, all reminders of vulnerability and isolation.
Within this environment, survival demanded constant awareness, strategic positioning, and unceasing mental endurance. The communal arrangements, meticulously crafted the night before, had been tested to their limits. Families had huddled together, infants sandwiched between adults, furs layered in thick folds, heated stones tucked beneath bedding. Every movement, every adjustment had been deliberate. A misplaced blanket, a slightly shifted child, or a momentary lapse in monitoring could have resulted in frostbite, illness, or worse. But now, as the first light filtered in, these calculated actions had borne fruit. Bodies had been kept warm, spirits had been maintained, and the fragile household had survived another night in a merciless environment. Women, who had borne the brunt of both physical and emotional labor during the night, could finally relax slightly, though exhaustion lingered. Layer upon layer of clothing, worn to preserve heat, was now loosened, and bodies that had radiated warmth to children and the elderly could rest without interruption. Mothers and caregivers exchanged quiet nods, acknowledging mutual endurance and the unspoken solidarity that had made survival possible. Their vigilance and resilience had not only protected life, they had ensured the continuation of the household in a world where every night posed deadly risks. Men, too, emerged from their postures of endurance, bodies stiffened from frozen stone floors or extended watch duties. Their responsibilities, guarding, rotating warmth, and monitoring the household, had been carried out with precision. The morning light revealed the subtle evidence of their struggle: flushed cheeks from exertion, the lingering numbness of fingers or toes, and the faint marks of frost upon clothing. Yet the overarching sentiment was one of quiet triumph, a recognition that the human body and spirit could endure what the environment demanded. Children, who had slept at the heart of the warmth, stirred with relative comfort. Their small bodies, shielded by adults and insulated by furs and blankets, were alive and ready to face the day. Infants, whose survival had seemed most precarious, now slept peacefully or were cradled awake by caregivers, their soft breaths a testament to the success of careful planning, communal collaboration, and relentless vigilance. The relief felt by adults was immense. Another night survived meant another day of life, learning, and growth. As fires were rekindled or tended to in hearths, warmth spread further into the stone corridors. Small, practical routines began to unfold. Breakfast preparations, the heating of water, inspection of blankets, and tending to those who had suffered minor frostbite or discomfort. The household transitioned from endurance to recovery, a delicate dance between action and relief. Every gesture, from lifting a blanket to stirring a pot of warming broth, carried significance, reinforcing the intricate link between survival strategies and daily routines. Reflection was inevitable. Surviving a night in such conditions illuminated the sheer ingenuity required to endure medieval winters. Knowledge passed down through generations: where to place children, how to layer furs, the optimal placement of heated stones, and the use of tapestries and curtains to create microclimates revealed a sophisticated understanding of human physiology and environmental management. Each dawn underscored the value of observation, cooperation, and adaptation, highlighting that survival was not merely passive, but active, thoughtful, and deeply skilled endeavor. The psychological dimension of survival was equally significant. Humans are social creatures, and the shared hardships of the night fostered a profound sense of interconnectedness. Adults who had radiated warmth to children, adjusted furs for companions, or coordinated microclimates experienced the emotional rewards of their labor: relief, gratitude, and quiet pride. Children, witnessing care and protection, internalized lessons of vigilance and resilience. Even the simple act of rising together in the first light of dawn created a collective acknowledgement of triumph over adversity. The castle, once a foreboding, icy labyrinth at night,
now appeared almost hospitable in the gentle glow of morning. Windows and battlements glimmered with frost, yet these same features had been navigated, endured, and conquered. Every cold gust, every draft, every restless shift in communal bedding was transformed into a story of endurance, innovation, and survival. The cold had been merciless, but human will, cooperation, and clever adaptation had triumphed. Even small details were celebrated. Heated stones still radiated residual warmth, blankets remained strategically positioned, and children stirred comfortably, evidence of careful planning and action. Meals, prepared from high-calorie foods and warming broths, reinforced bodily resilience, completing a cycle that began with preparation, endured through vigilance, and culminated in the reward of warmth, nourishment, and life itself. Ultimately, dawn after a cold night was more than a natural event. It was a symbol of human endurance, adaptability, and the triumph of life over a hostile environment. Each household, whether noble or common, engaged in a dance of survival that merged physical skill, social cooperation, and psychological fortitude. The cold, the darkness, and the cold were formidable, yet medieval inhabitants navigated them with ingenuity, resilience, and unwavering determination. As the sun rose higher, promising a slightly warmer day, there was quiet celebration in every small victory. A family had endured, children had survived, and another chapter of human ingenuity in the harsh winter had been written. These mornings carried lessons not only about the past, but about the universal human capacity to endure, adapt, and triumph over adversity, proving that even in the coldest, darkest nights, life could persist and even flourish through courage, cooperation, and relentless perseverance.
The morning rituals, reawakening in stone and frost. The first light of morning didn't bring warmth, only visibility. The sun was pale, weak, and distant, struggling to pierce the mist that hung over the frozen courtyard. Inside the castle, the air remained sharp enough to sting exposed skin. Yet there was movement again, slow, deliberate, and filled with the cautious energy of people reawakening from a night of survival. Servants stirred first, their breath misted in the chill as they shuffled toward the great hall to rekindle fires that had burned low through the night. The ashes were carefully stirred, embers coaxed back to life with handfuls of dried twigs and precious bits of kindling. The faint crackle of flame was the first sound of renewal, the heartbeat of the waking fortress. With it came a subtle sense of reassurance. The night had not won. Those who had shared beds stirred reluctantly, their muscles stiff from immobility and cold. Blankets damp from breath and condensation were folded aside. Frost glimmered on tapestries and window frames, catching the faint light like powdered glass. The smell of smoke, wood, and faint animal musk hung in the air, the scent of life continuing despite the odds. Breakfast was not a feast, but a necessity. Thick bread, yesterday's broth reheated, and the first sip of something warm from a cauldron, often a spiced drink or thin ale, were consumed in silence. People chewed slowly, feeling warmth spread inward, the way sunlight eventually melts frost. Food was energy, yes, but it was also comfort for the spirit, a reaffirmation that the body was still capable of feeling, digesting, and enduring. Around the castle, morning duties began with ritual precision. The same routines that had ensured survival through the night were now reversed. Bedding aired to prevent dampness, ashes removed to clear smoke, and clothing rotated near the fire to dry. Every motion had purpose. To the untrained eye, it looked mundane, repetitive, but to those living it, every task was an act of defense, small fortifications built daily against the cold's relentless assault. Children, wrapped in oversized wool garments,
shuffled across the flagstones toward the warmth of the fire. Their cheeks were pink, their noses running, but their eyes bright with the small wonder of light after darkness. Their laughter, however faint, broke the silence of the hall, a sound that seemed almost miraculous against the backdrop of stone and frost. Outside, the world glittered cruelly. Frost had painted every surface white, from battlements to the withered garden walls. The well was a frozen column. Water had to be hacked loose with an iron rod before it could be drawn. Horses snorted clouds of vapor, hooves clattering on ice as grooms brushed their coats and checked their feed. Even animals required vigilance. A single night of exposure could mean sickness or death. The castle, despite its harshness, was a world of adaptation. Everyone knew their role in the morning ritual. Servants inspected walls for dampness. Women beat the dust and frost from hangings. Men reinforced shutters and checked firewood supplies. Every action, however small, contributed to the fragile equilibrium of survival. Order was the only defense against the chaos of nature. For the nobility, mornings carried both comfort and burden. Their beds were higher, their blankets thicker, yet the chill had crept into every layer all the same. Rising meant leaving what little warmth they possessed and donning garments that felt like armor against the cold. Their attendants helped them dress quickly, layers of wool, fur, and linen wrapped in practiced sequence, while braziers hissed softly nearby. Even luxury here was relative. Comfort was not abundance, but endurance made bearable. As the sun climbed higher, thin rays finally touched the flagstone floors, scattering faint warmth that barely registered on the skin, but lifted the heart. People began to move more freely, their bodies remembering motion after hours of restraint. Chores resumed, trade resumed, prayers resumed. The castle was alive again, not with joy, but with persistence. There was an unspoken rhythm to it all. Survive the night, rebuild in the morning, prepare for the next cold to come. Each day was both a victory and a rehearsal for the next battle against the elements. And though no one said it aloud, every dawn carried an unvoiced gratitude for warmth, for life, for another chance to endure. In this way, the medieval morning was not simply the start of a new day. It was a moment of collective resilience. Fires reignited, bodies moved, food was shared, and breath filled the air like living mist. The cold was still there, waiting, testing, reminding everyone that comfort was fragile and temporary. But for now, the people of the castle had reclaimed their world from the night. And as the sun finally broke through the morning haze, glinting off the ice-encrusted battlements, the stone fortress, that unyielding monument of survival, once again stood proud against the wind. The day had begun, and the living, the firekeepers, guardians of heat and hope. The fire was more than light. It was life itself, a trembling, glowing barrier between the living and the deathly cold that ruled the medieval world. Every flicker of flame in those ancient castles was a heartbeat, and those who kept it alive were the unseen heroes of survival, the firekeepers. They were not noblemen or warriors. They were servants, peasants, sometimes even children. But in the endless war against winter, they were the true soldiers. Long before the rest of the castle stirred, before the first cock crowed, or the faintest dawn touched the frozen sky, the firekeepers were awake. Their fingers were numb, their faces raw from the cold. Wrapped in tattered wool and smelling of smoke, they shuffled through silent corridors, carrying bundles of kindling under their arms. Every step echoed faintly in the vast sleeping halls. The fires from the night before had nearly died. Only faint red embers glowed under layers of ash. The air was biting, sharp enough to draw tears from their eyes. Frost sparkled on every surface like powdered glass. The firekeeper's breath came in white clouds as they knelt beside the hearth, blowing gently on the embers, feeding them twigs, whispering prayers that the coals would wake. If the fire died completely, it could take hours to restart, hours of unbearable cold for everyone inside. That was a risk they could never afford. The first spark caught. The dry wood hissed, and flame licked upward with a sigh, a fragile miracle reborn. The firekeeper leaned closer, letting the warmth kiss their cracked skin. For a moment they just stared, mesmerized. That glow meant survival. It meant people would wake to life, not to death. Every castle had its fire hierarchy. In great halls, massive hearths burned all day and night, devouring entire logs. In smaller chambers, braziers and stone fireplaces flickered weakly, barely enough to push back the chill. Wood was precious, more valuable than gold in the dead of winter. The forests around the castle were often stripped bare, and yet it was never enough. Servants scavenged endlessly, breaking old furniture, splitting cartwheels, burning even peat and dried dung when wood ran low. The smell was foul, thick, choking, but heat had no luxury of pride. To live was to burn whatever could catch fire. And yet, the heat barely reached everyone. The nobles had fires in their chambers. The servants huddled near kitchen ovens or animal stalls, where body heat mixed with the scent of straw and dung. The poorest, stable boys, kitchen maids, guards on night duty, often had nothing but their cloaks and faith to protect them. Some pressed their bare feet against warm stones from the fire before rushing to their posts, holding on to that fleeting heat like a blessing. But fire was dangerous too. Castles built of wood and thatch had burned to the ground in the blink of an eye. A single spark could mean destruction. So every night, the firekeepers balanced between two enemies, the cold that could kill silently and the fire that could kill all at once. They learned to bank the flames, covering them in ash so they smoldered safely till morning. They carried embers in covered pots when moving from one chamber to another, the medieval version of carrying the sun in your hands. And sometimes, when winds howled through cracks in the walls and snow forced its way inside, they sat beside the hearths all night, whispering stories or prayers, keeping the fire alive with their own sleeplessness. The fire wasn't only for heat. It was the center of life inside those frozen stone fortresses. People gathered around it to eat, talk, mend clothes, or pray. It was where children learned songs, where soldiers told stories of distant battles, where women spun wool and whispered secrets. In the dance of shadows and light, humanity remembered itself, even when everything outside was white, dead, and silent. Sometimes a nobleman or lady would pass the firekeepers in the early morning, barely noticing them. But when storms raged and snow piled against the castle gates, those same nobles would silently thank them, though never aloud, because without those humble hands, their silk and fur would mean nothing. And yet, not all knights were victorious. There were stories, whispered, grim, of fires that failed, of entire families frozen in their beds, of children found in the morning stiff and still, their faces peaceful as if asleep. In those moments, firekeepers carried guilt like a curse. They had fought the cold and lost. Still, they rose again the next night. They gathered wood, coaxed flame, and prayed harder, because giving up meant letting death walk freely through the castle. In their eyes, fire was faith made visible. The bond between humans and flame was ancient and spiritual. To lose the fire was to lose hope itself. Many medieval chronicles mention prayers said for the keeping of warmth. Priests blessed hearths during midwinter feasts. Women would toss herbs into the fire to keep away illness. The flame was protection, purification, and memory. Sometimes, on the coldest nights, when howling winds made the walls tremble, even the most hardened knights found themselves sitting quietly before the hearth, not speaking, just staring. The fire reminded them of life's fragility and its beauty. By dawn, the firekeepers' eyes burned red from smoke. Their hands were blistered, their bodies sore. But when they looked around, saw people stirring, children smiling, the first sighs of warmth spreading through the hall, they knew they had done something sacred. In a world ruled by frost and silence, they had kept the heart beating. And as smoke curled lazily up toward the blackened rafters, the first golden light of morning slipped through the arrow slits and touched the flames, two lights meeting at last. The firekeepers leaned back, exhausted, but at peace. Another night had been conquered. The castle still.
The long winter famine, when even fire couldn't save them. Winter had teeth. By the third month, it no longer felt like a season. It felt like a siege. The fire still burned, but it wasn't enough anymore. Outside the castle walls, snow lay in cruel drifts, taller than men. The fields were white deserts. The rivers were solid glass. The roads, once full of merchants and messengers, had disappeared beneath layers of ice. The world was silent. Only the wind spoke, howling endlessly across the hills. And in that silence, hunger began to whisper. At first it was manageable. The larders were stocked from the harvest, grains, salted meat, dried beans. But weeks became months. What had once seemed plentiful began to vanish. Bread rations grew smaller, the salt meat tougher and thinner, and every meal became an act of careful counting. The cooks worked miracles, stretching the impossible. Soups grew watery, oats were mixed with bark, flour was ground finer and finer, until even the weevils in it were welcomed as protein. No one complained out loud, not yet. The Lord's word was law, and his household maintained the appearance of control. But eyes grew hollower each day, and voices quieter. Even the fire seemed to lose its warmth. Outside the keep in the village below, things were far worse. The peasants had no grand halls, no thick tapestries, no endless stores. They relied on what the earth gave, and the earth had frozen solid. Cabbages, roots, turnips, gone. Chickens stopped laying. Livestock died in the snow, their bodies freezing before anyone could butcher them. People stripped bark from trees, boiled leather shoes, even chewed hay just to keep their stomachs from turning inside out. And still they came to the castle gates, desperate and shivering, begging for food or fire. The guards turned many away. Some were allowed inside, their faces gaunt and gray. They slept in the stables with the animals, sharing warmth in silence, their breath rising in ghostly plumes. Children clung to their mothers, wrapped in rags. Some didn't wake up by morning. Hunger changed people. It stripped away the manners of civilization, revealing what survival really meant. The noble ladies who once fussed over fabrics now sewed torn blankets together with trembling hands. Knights who once rode into battle now spent hours beside kitchen fires, scraping the bottoms of pots. Servants scavenged every crumb like treasure. The line between lord and peasant blurred, erased by the equal cruelty of the cold.
Even the fire peepers, once the heroes of warmth, found their fuel dwindling. Forests near the castle had been stripped bare. Men went out in groups to cut more wood, and some never came back, buried by avalanches, lost to blizzards, or found days later, frozen mid-step. The fires began to shrink. One hearth after another went cold. The nights grew unbearable. You could hear the castle groaning as the frost crept into its stones. Ice spread across the inside of windows. Every breath was visible, even in bed. Blankets were piled so high that people could barely move beneath them. And yet it wasn't enough. The wind found its way through every crack, every keyhole. It sang like a dying thing. People slept in layers, wool, fur, linen, sometimes 3 or 4 people huddled together, sharing body heat. Shame no longer mattered. Privacy was forgotten. Warmth was survival, and survival was all that mattered. Mothers pressed infants against their bare chests to share body heat. Lovers clung without romance, only instinct. The air smelled of sweat, smoke, and desperation. Then came the famine's cruelest turn, disease. With the cold came rot, spoiled meat, stagnant water. The human body, weakened by hunger, was an open invitation to sickness. Coughs echoed through the castle corridors. Fevers burned like the fires they couldn't keep lit. There was no doctor to call, no cure to hope for. The chapel became a refuge, filled with whispers and prayers. Some prayed for warmth, others prayed for an end. The priest said it was a test, that suffering purified the soul. But for those who watched their children shiver in the dark, holiness was a cold comfort. There were stories told at the hearth, in those moments when the flames still burned. Stories of past winters, even worse than this one. Of years when snow fell for 40 days without stopping. Of castles abandoned, frozen corpses still sitting upright in chairs when spring came. And always those stories ended the same way, with fire. The survivors burned whatever they had left, tables, barrels, doors, even parts of the roof. The castle became a skeleton of smoke and cinders, but it lived. And so they did the same now. The great hall, once a place of feasts and laughter, turned into a survival pit. The nobles sat wrapped in rags near the last burning hearth. No music, no banquets, only the crackle of flame and the sound of snow pelting the shutters. Every face was hollow, illuminated by flickering orange light. A single loaf of bread was passed between them. No one spoke. Every bite was a promise to make it through one more night. But human endurance is a strange thing. Even when all warmth is gone, even when hope is thin as ice, something inside refuses to die. In the coldest month, February, a rumor spread through the castle. The snows were melting. The hunters who dared to climb the outer walls saw water trickling down from the battlements. Birds had returned, silent shadows in the gray sky. People began to weep at the sight, not from sadness, but relief so deep it hurt. They had survived, barely. When the thaw finally came, the castle smelled of smoke and sickness. The fires that had saved them had also marked everything black, but no one cared. The sound of dripping water, of mud instead of ice, of distant streams beginning to move again, those were the most beautiful sounds anyone had ever heard. They emerged blinking into the weak sunlight, pale, trembling, but alive. The famine had taken much, friends, family, strength. But it had left something behind, too. Resilience. A quiet, unbreakable will to live.
and as they gathered around the last dying embers of the hearth, one of the firekeepers whispered, "We didn't just survive the cold. We survived."
The return of spring, rebirth after the ice. When spring finally came, it did not arrive with trumpets or sunlight. It came quietly, like a whisper breaking the silence after a long prayer. At first, no one believed it. The people of the castle had forgotten what color looked like. Their world had been a monochrome of white and gray for so long that even the idea of green felt like something from a dream. But one morning, the wind changed. It was softer, less like a blade, more like a sigh. And then came the drip. Water. It fell from the battlements, from the frozen gutters, from the mouths of stone gargoyles that had stood icy and still for months. The sound was tiny, a drop, then another, then another. But it was the most beautiful sound in the world. It meant the ice was dying. It meant the sun was coming home. The people of the castle emerged slowly, blinking in the pale light. Their faces were thin, their eyes ringed with dark shadows, but there was something new in their expressions, hope, fragile as the first crocus pushing through the snow. The snowdrifts that had buried the courtyard began to sink. Stone steps reappeared. Wooden beams, once encased in frost, now wept with moisture. The smell of thawing earth rose, damp, rich, alive. For months their world had smelled only of smoke, cold metal, and fear. Now the air carried the scent of mud, moss, and melting pine. Inside the castle, the fires were allowed to burn lower, not because the wood had run out, but because they didn't need it as much. People began to open shutters again. Light spilled across walls that hadn't seen daylight since autumn. Tapestries, stiff from frost, softened in the warmth. For the first time in months, the castle breathed. And with that breath came sound. The sound of laughter. Tentative at first, a child's giggle, a servant humming, then louder, freer, unstoppable. Someone strummed a lute that had been silent all winter. Someone else began to sing, off-key but joyful. Even the animals seemed to sense the change. Horses stomped and neighed. Dogs barked and raced through the melting snow, tails wagging madly. It felt like the whole world was waking up. But survival came with a price. The people who walked out into the sunlight were not the same as those who had faced the first snows. They were thinner, older, harder. They carried the memory of cold deep inside them, a shadow that would never quite fade. Many had lost friends. Some had lost family. The famine had carved scars not only on their bodies, but in their hearts. And yet, in that shared suffering, something had been born. A quiet solidarity, a bond forged in frost and fire. No one spoke about it aloud, but every glance, every nod between them carried a silent acknowledgement. We endured. The lord of the castle, once distant and untouchable, now walked among his people. He no longer wore the bright silks of court, but the same wool and fur as everyone else. He thanked the firekeepers. He helped bury the dead. He stood shoulder to shoulder with the peasants repairing broken walls. The hierarchy that winter had crushed under the weight of survival remained softer now, more human. Cold had been the great equalizer. Hunger had stripped away rank. Even in the great hall, where banners hung limp and soot-darkened from months of smoke,
The first feast of spring was humble: barley soup, coarse bread, a few dried apples, but it felt like a banquet for kings. Every bite tasted like victory. Outside the castle, the world itself seemed reborn. Icicles melted into rivulets that trickled down into the fields. The first shoots of grass pushed through the thawing soil. Birds returned, filling the gray silence with song. Deer, thin but alive, stepped carefully into the meadows, sniffing the air. The peasants began planting again, hands still stiff from the cold, but hearts light. The soil, though heavy and wet, was forgiving. It accepted the seeds like an old friend. And when the first buds appeared on the trees, small, trembling, impossibly green, some wept openly. After so many nights of fear, life had remembered them. But spring was not just a season, it was a teacher. It reminded them that warmth is not to be taken for granted, that food, laughter, even sleep, all the things they once thought ordinary, were in truth miracles. Around the fires, smaller now, gentler, people told stories of the winter just past. They spoke of the snow that came up to the windows, of the frozen bread that had to be cut with axes, of the nights when the wind screamed so loud it sounded like ghosts. But they also spoke of kindness, of a neighbor who shared his last loaf, of a woman who kept a baby alive with her own body heat, of a boy who spent all night feeding the fire while others slept. Those stories spread like embers, glowing in every corner of the hall. They were not stories of despair. They were stories of defiance. Even months later, when the fields bloomed and the castle walls gleamed in the sun, people still woke sometimes in the middle of the night, reaching for their blankets, half expecting to see frost on the walls. The memory of cold lingered like a ghost, but that memory also made the warmth sweeter. Every sunrise was a blessing, every meal a gift, every night without shivering a small miracle. And when the first summer storm rolled in, with thunder shaking the sky and rain hammering the roofs, the people didn't hide. They ran outside, faces lifted, laughing, letting the rain soak through their hair and clothes, because after the winter they had survived, even the storm felt like grace. As the season deepened and life returned to its rhythms, planting, harvesting, rebuilding, the castle stood stronger than before, not because its walls had changed, but because the people inside had. They had faced the coldest winter of their lives. They had watched death walk their halls, and yet they had endured, not as nobles and peasants, not as men and women, but as humans, bound by the same simple will to live. And somewhere deep in the castle, in the same hearth that once had been their only light in endless darkness, the fire still burned, smaller now, gentler, but alive. Its flames whispered softly in the language of memory. You have known the dark, you have felt the cold. Now, the last night of winter was different. No one said it aloud, but everyone could feel it. In the air, in the way the wind moved, in the way the fire crackled softer than before. The castle had survived. The cold had lost. Outside, the moon hung over the thawing hills like a pale guardian. The snow was no longer pure white. It shimmered with patches of dark earth breaking through, as if the land itself was waking from a nightmare. Inside, the people of the castle gathered for one final vigil. They didn't call it that, but after months of darkness, every moment felt sacred. The great hall was still blackened by smoke. the walls scarred by frost, but the fire burned bright, steady, golden, proud. Around it sat men and women who had faced death together. Some had lost everything. Others had found strength they never knew they had. No titles mattered now. No rank, no bloodline. Only the living and the fire. For a long time no one spoke. They simply watched the flames. Every crack and hiss of the burning wood seemed to tell a story, of nights when breath froze in the air, of mornings when water turned to stone, of quiet prayers whispered under heavy blankets. Then an old woman, the midwife of the castle, began to hum. Her voice was rough, cracked by years of cold and smoke, but it carried something pure, a melody older than memory. Slowly, others joined in, servants, guards, even the Lord himself. The song had no words, only the sound of people remembering that they were alive. The firelight danced on their faces, turning tears into gold. When the song faded, silence returned. But it was not the silence of fear anymore. It was peace. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall, tapping gently against the shutters. Not snow, rain. Real, living rain. Someone laughed. A sound so rare, so sudden, that others followed. Laughter that grew and filled the hall, echoing off stone, until it felt like the castle itself was laughing. For months the cold had ruled their world, merciless, invisible, undefeatable. But now it was only memory. Before everyone drifted off to sleep, one of the firekeepers, the same who had tended the hearth every night without fail, looked into the flames and whispered softly, "We've carried the light through the longest night. The rest is easy." And as the fire settled into glowing embers, the castle exhaled, a deep, ancient sigh of relief. The war with winter was over. The next morning, when sunlight spilled across the courtyard for the first time in months, it felt like grace itself had descended. The cold was gone, but its lesson remained. That warmth is not a gift, it's a victory.